So a couple of audios back, I was kind of joking about new shoes and possibility and bright shiny objects. It's one side of an equation. Kind of comes back to the notion of, why do you need so many pairs of shoes? Okay, sure, utility. You need a pair of boots for a safe working environment, steel toe caps if you're doing, heavy industry type of thing. Running shoes, appropriate for all those things. Cycling shoes with the clips to clip onto the pedals. So on and so on. Fashion shoes, however, the utility starts to get narrower. So yes, there are going out functions. There's nightclub functions. There's black tie functions. There's walking up and down steps, not in high heel functions. All sorts of different functions. But also the expression of individuality that it goes with the outfit. It's a contrast device, or it's a complementary device. In simple terms, the colour of the belt ought to match the colour of the shoes, so on and so on. And the other 100,000 rules of fashion that I won't even pretend to know. It's a fascinating subject for sure. The body shape, the height, the style, the width, the golden ratios, the contrast, the complementing colours, colour theory. Oh, for crying out loud. That's not as easy. I did a bit of design work a while ago to do with matching colours in knitting patterns, and I was downloading all sorts of libraries for Python to do with nearest colour matching and farthest colour matching, and it's not trivial. And this is the fascination that on one hand we can just take colours and fabrics and throw them together and repeat. Does it work? No. Do it a different way. Does it work? No. Repeat. Do it another way. Does it work? Yes. That's a golden ticket. Or we can run the mathematics and try and engineer it. I don't know which approach is best. And the question is always, I suppose, what is the goal? What are we aiming for? That look. For who? The male gaze? Or for the female gaze? And then who's wearing it? A man or a woman? What does it matter? And all interesting questions. And it's all this discernment, barriers, outlines that fascinates me. It's like, to know what chair is, we have to know what not chair is. When is an art exhibition that has 4 legs and a plinth that can take a weight, a stool, but if we put a back on it, it's a chair, but if it's never sat on, which is the function of a chair, then is it a chair or an art piece in the museum? All fascinating stuff. And we covered some of this in the Francis Bacon videos, all to do with denoter and perspective and boundary conditions, context. But it brings me to the notion that difference, some people have a metafilter that sorts for difference first, some people sort for sameness the first. And so difference is descriptive and discriminatory. Now, discrimination has a bit of a negative valence on it because discrimination is bad, but only if the actions or policy or enforced choice, i.e. the application of power, disenfranchise particular groups of people because of that decision or that discernment. So we might discern things, we recognise people are in some way different. So what? It's only when we make a rule that because of that difference they can't do this or they can't do that and we can. But I'll come on to that in a minute. So yeah, difference, descriptive and discriminatory. An idea is information of a difference. It's a package of information, an idea, an information about something that's different, boundary conditions, tensions. And an idea is neither material nor measurable. It's a representation of a relationship. So difference and sameness, merely qualities of this discernment. It's an effect of comparison, perspective, if you like, and therefore subject to change. So I suppose in this way, difference is not considered as a limitation, and not even necessarily as a set of attributes, although attributes are the things that we use to describe, it's difficult to explain. So we use the attributes to tell of things like dimension and weight and colour, and then we can tell of a different object And it's different because it has different weight, different colour. If it had the same weight, same colour, same position in space, same momentum, same everything, it would be the same object. So the attributes are the description of the difference. But that's only the description of the difference. The actual difference is, as I say, not measurable, it's not tangible, it's an idea. But there seems to be this thing in mind and consciousness and all that good stuff about how we form meanings of things, that certain things have like I don't have the language to describe it, so it's almost as though we have an idea about something. And the notion that gives rise to the idea means that we must have spotted a difference between things, or else we wouldn't have had the emergent idea. And there has to be, or it seems to me at least, that there is a minimal distance between things that suddenly makes an emergence to an idea. And it seems like the greater the distance between things has space for lots of ideas, but there seems to be perhaps a minimal distance that's required for something to suddenly emerge as being recognised or being perceived as having difference. So, I mean, take a simple example. How many colours are there? Well, it depends on your level of discernment, doesn't it? It depends on the instrument that you're using to measure that frequency of light. So we create boundary conditions. So between this frequency and that frequency, we're going to call it red. Between this frequency and that frequency, to a large degree, we're going to call it blue. And then, of course, when we get reflections of light that overlap with many different frequencies, we start calling it pink and stuff like that. And that's my little joke, because my understanding is that there's no such actual colour as pink. It's a perception thing that happens in our eyeball, and between our eyeball receiving light of different frequencies and our brain interpreting or putting a perspective of discernment on that combination that we call pink. And whilst we're at it, there's another point of humorous contention. What rhymes with orange? No, it doesn't. Purple. That's another joke. I find it tickles me. It's funny. So anyway, it seems to be a bit of a humorous toing and froing about whether this colour pink is real or not. But then the real question, which kind of brings us back to our point, is, are the other colours really real either? You know, it's just different frequencies of light. How we perceive them in our mind is perhaps an illusion. So we're kind of getting down the rabbit hole a bit now. But this is what I'm trying to get at, is that these notions of difference and sameness are really I don't know whether to even say objective or subjective comparisons of whether something falls on this side of the outline or boundary condition or the other side of the outline or boundary condition. So, I don't know, let's look at a light wave spectrum. 580 nanometers. A bit shorter than that, we might say it's green. A bit longer than that, we might say it's red. But right on 480, it's kind of yellow. And if you zoom in, is it becoming more yellow or kind of less green and less red? Yeah, so, you know, some things don't have these hard boundaries. But it seems as though in the endeavour of human beings to be able to make decisions, the perceptions always seem analog, but the decisions, of course, are binary. You either decide to do or you decide not to do, or to do at a later time. Let's start on that one. So this seems to be the problem, or the dilemma, is to slice and dice analog input to a digital decision. So I'm going to say that difference and sameness, whether they be objective or subjective, even if we say they're objective, and that depends on the instrument that we're using and the accuracy and precision of that instrument, the boundary of discernment either gets narrower, in which case it changes. And if it's subjective, then, you know, this is according to our own internal perspective about things. So sameness and difference, they are the effects of comparison, perspectives, rather than quanta. And if they're perspectives, then they're changeable. They're volatile conventions, rather than actual essence. You know, the almost ephemeral, emergent phenomena. And I think this is where kind of reframing and gestalt therapy comes in, that we can change our perspective, therefore change which side of those boundary conditions we are on, which changes our decisions about things. And so now, finally, the kicker, what we were talking about before, where observer who has observed is changed by the observation and therefore changes their function of observing, the feedback loop. So if it is right that the communication of difference, whether it's externally communicated or even emergent in our own mind as an awareness to our conscious selves of a difference, if that is a result of a mental process, then this information that's being raised as a discernment of difference or sameness is a result of what's going on in our mind. Then it seems to me that our very capability of discernment is changed by that very same process. And in a way, I suppose, it becomes relativistic, because what are we making a comparison with to notice a difference? Previous experience, previous knowledge that we assume to be correct. But now we have new information, we may be able to update our old mental hierarchies or our mental experience or the way we look at things. And so the internal benchmarks start to shift about what qualifies as difference. So it seems that the whole thing is in flux. And I guess this is what we're talking about, that people who are speaking, that they're emotionally overloaded. This is the state they find themselves in. You know, what's really real? And I suppose it's what we talked about in the Francis Bacon episodes. What context is appropriate to hold on to, and the descent into madness is that kind of loss of all context, and the climbing out of that pit of voidness blazes behind it. The art. So the art that an artist does when climbing out this kind of pit leaves behind it the information that they must have come across that enabled them to get out of that pit. They've seen a new difference, a new way of climbing out of a lack of context. It's almost like a holographic endeavour. Yeah, holograph, waves, information everywhere. Can't get away from it. It's always there. It's just our instrumentation either isn't sensitive enough, or we don't have the internal reference points upon which to base a difference. I mean, I remember once I worked for a car dealership, and on the bottom of the stationery it said head office in some town called Croydon. And I thought, maybe that's where their lawyers are. Didn't think anything of it. 6 months went by, and then someone else noticed that it said Croydon, which is not where the dealership was at all. And then it went to the general manager and said, how did that get there? And had it all replaced. It was a misprint. I didn't know, because I didn't know. I didn't know the other piece of information upon which to make that judgment. And so it's always weird to me. It's a bit like your first boyfriend or your first girlfriend. You don't know what to ask for, because you just don't know what is available in the world, and you don't know what they're prepared to do, because this is the awkward conversations, isn't it? So this brings us, I suppose, to a model of mind. And I remember reading about parts in a book called Why Everyone Else is a Hypocrite, which talked about why we have these hypocritical moments, or areas of willful ignorance, or as it's referred to in NLP, parts of mind. And I'm sure a lot of that's based on people like Gregory Bateson, who I think wrote the book on this. And I think it was even Bateson who said that if mind is an aggregate of interacting parts or components, then the interaction between those parts is the source of coherence of mind. And this is the perception of discontinuity, which I suppose he means that all these boundary conditions that are formed because of parts of mind, the way we navigate through all those parts to be functioning human beings, is the rise of a apparent coherence, that in some way we're able to transcend all the dead ends and cul-de-sacs and paradoxes and contradictions, and somehow function with other human beings in a perceptible way that makes sense. But again, I say that in jest, but it means that the other person receiving that message also is able to transcend their own discontinuities to act in a reciprocal way that makes sense back. It might not even be objective sense or any kind of, even it's merely a subjective experience that allows us to get along. I'm sure if an alien came down, you know, that thought experiment, these crazy bastards, what are they up to? This is just incoherent. Look at the way that they're screwing everything up. Yeah. So what's the point of going through all this? Long story short, this is what is emerging from me, that all people are doing is perceiving and making decisions. The perception seems to be based on analogues, infinitely variable scales, but decisions seem to be quantized. Yes, no, a little bit, maybe. It leads to an action. And people have blind spots in their perception. We all do, like I was saying about the stationery that had Croydon on. I didn't have the other piece of information that the head office wasn't actually in Croydon, it was somewhere else, and it was a misprint. So unarticulated differences have almost no consequence, almost no existence. There's nothing to compare with. And I think this comes back to doing the listening part, that the speaker might have a cognitive blind spot or a logical fallacy or a discontinuity of mind or a conflict of parts or a missing part that if they had would help them make a decision about something. So this seems to be the art of listening. It's to help people navigate all these issues of mind, help them navigate parts, explore parts, develop parts that are missing or filling blanks, or bring awareness, more awareness, less awareness, focus in, focus out. Seems to be also expressions of things like time, space and matter. I mean, what else is there except the emergent phenomena that ties all those together? Because isn't that what all this is about? It's a re-representation. Well, it's even in the word, isn't it? Re-presentation. So representation of time, space and energy. And it applies to commerce. We're getting back to those shoes again. So when we talk about a different style of shoes, something that we really like, there's a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of perception, a lot of matter gone into the idea of what that represents, what it means, what its utility is, what its potential is, our hopes, our desires, our wishes and our needs all expressed as not necessarily in the object, but somehow that the object has a relation to us, our self-actualizations, our expression, our needing to be heard, the way we wish to represent ourselves to the world, the way we want to express, the way we've sliced and diced it. And that's all well and good, and it's interesting, and it's all part of the human endeavour, I suppose. But at the end of the day, I'm also cautious because I remember something else Bateson talked about, which found its way into NLP, and certainly in change therapy and counselling, asking the questions that help people make change, but it's also the minimum required to help people change. You know, don't take a hammer to crack a nut. Use the smallest amount of influence required for them to move where they want to go. So then it becomes approximated to what's the difference that makes the difference. And a lot of noise doesn't have any difference. So it's not, is it worth talking about when, in comparison to not talking about it, there are other things that effect change that are worth therefore talking about, in preference to talking about nothing that doesn't change anything. So is that a utilitarian model? Maybe. And again, talking about noise, interesting as well, because the answers are sometimes in the noise. We've just got to filter out parts of it. I think Bateson also described an experiment where if we have a filter and within the filter is noise, and we have another filter that also has built within it noise, and then we bring these two together, emergent new information can actually be useful. And I kind of think this goes back to overlying red and violet opposite ends of the rainbow, and we get pink. And what I'm kind of discovering is that if we had the language or the words or the exact, precise and most efficient way of describing difference first time, then by necessity it would already exist in awareness. It would already have been known, because to have gone through the process of refinement that reduces it to its minimal difference, that expresses the difference, then it has been discovered, it is now known. So this just simply can't be. So whenever we're trying to describe something new or a new idea, help people decide about things, help them change with their perspective or inner understanding, if we could hit it in one go with the exact phrase that would be the answer, they would already know. So the fact that that phrase doesn't exist yet, or that particular way of slicing and dicing for the context of their mind doesn't yet exist, this is all a discovery process, and therefore it is always going to be sloppy. It is always going to be messy. We're going to use approximations. We're going to try and get close to meaning, as we've described when someone says something that's an expression of what they mean, but not actually what they mean. And then we hear it, interpret it, and then we try and attribute meaning to it according to our own internal messed up filters of parts and bias and cognitive flaws. And then we feed that back to them. So it's a continual cycle. And it's the interaction of these two that give rise to a new system. You know, one can't be heard without a listener, and a listener can't listen without a speaker. Perhaps then it's useful just to think of difference and sameness, not as anything real or concrete, but the result or emergence of thinking. It is itself a process, and in that end, if it's a process that's ongoing, there really is no beginning and really no ending either. And if it's fair to say that it's a process by which we make decisions, does it become politics? I mean, I had to look it up by the very definition of politics, the activities associated with governance of a country or area, especially the debate between parties having power. And if power is about choice, and choices are the things before decisions, then the bit that we're doing here, the perceiving that leads to an awareness of choice that leads to decisions, is what it's all about. So I think I mentioned this before as well on a few audios, that I read a few books from time to time, as you probably gathered, and sometimes I'll read a few pages and I'll just have to stop and let that sink in, because it's a new idea, a new concept, and what follows in the book is likely built on that, so it has to be integrated into mind before I can read on. It challenges what I already believed, or it challenges the way I was thinking, and I have to sit back, put the kettle on, go for a cup of tea or a walk and let that integrate. And it's funny, you reach saturation points, and sometimes it'll be like, okay, wow, that's pretty heavy, I need to let that integrate, and then I'll go and watch a YouTube video about an unrelated topic, and it'd be like, damn, this is what I've just been reading about. So the manifestation is almost immediate, that it's the YouTube video had nothing to do with what I was reading about, but it was the fact that what I was reading about changed my perception of what I was watching, and what I was watching is perhaps closer to my own model of the world. It might be some inane video, pop video or something that I've seen 100 times before, or some news item that we've heard 100 times before, and suddenly it stands out because the perception of what's been said has been changed by what I've just read, whilst that's still in mind. And what I really hate more than anything else is reading a book. I've started reading one, I've forgotten what it is. About 3 months ago I read it, I thought, wow, that's just changed my mind on so many things. This is going to be a good read. And I had to put it down and let it integrate, and then got distracted and I forgot what book it was, and I really want to go back to it. But I'm slipping back to my old ways as I've not practiced the uptake of that new concept. So I'm kind of annoyed with myself. But again, new ideas, new concepts, listening to people, asking them questions, gets them to think about things they never thought about before, and it can be disturbing. New parts in mind emerge, boundaries collapse, things integrate, it changes the meaning or even the thinking process, and it takes time for those to integrate and for those elements to cohere into a mind. And I think sometimes we might have problems where we introduce a conflicting part that goes against everything we knew. And I've even seen this in conversations I used to have years ago when I used to really stick it to the religious extremists who were proselytizing in bad faith under the discussion of a easy conversation, but really they were just proselytizing, and it irritated me. So I'd give back a little bit hard, a little bit brutal, and by the end of the conversation they'd say something like, "You make me sick." And I could appreciate what they were saying, and I'd write back, yes, thinking for yourself for the first time in your life is nauseating, I understand. And when you've let that integrate, I'll be happy to talk to you further. Of course, it was my little dig at them. But it seems often things said at face value actually have deep meanings. And, it's like, literally, I can't get over myself, or I can't help myself. These little expressions reveal inner truths. Yes, there's some boundary condition that they can't get over. They have an addiction to something that they can't let go of, and what they're saying is, I can't help myself. It's really kind of, I need help with this externally. Internally, I can't cope or handle with my addiction. I need external help. That's what they're saying. What you've said makes me sick. Yes, it's probably unpleasant to your moral framework and ecology of mind. It's probably highly offensive to that because you've been brainwashed all your life. And the misplacing or misattributing the item of what makes them feel sick, because they're experiencing inner nausea, just because it happens to be at the same time as they're having a conversation with me, it's easy to blame that. Like I was saying, I'll read something profound in a book and then just try and ease off and go and watch a YouTube video or something, and it'll be like, damn, this is exactly what it's about. It's not. It's a projection. It's a change in perspective that's been caused by the book, that I now can see YouTube videos or things in a different light that causes me a little bit of disconcerting feeling. And of course, it's easy to blame the thing that's right there in front of us, that's in focus. It's much harder to blame the parents that told us a lie, the church that told us lies, the people that we associated with that perpetuated the lie for the sake of staying in a tribe. To give all that up after 30 or 40 years is a big ask. Of course, it's nauseating to realise it was all a lie. But be it religion, be it fashion, be it politics, be it ideology, it has a similar smell. These are power structures. And the power structures, because they've sliced and diced things that lead to certain behaviours consistent with decisions based on the perceptions of the ideas, and ideas being information on difference. So it's my hope that that sentence will reach a profound part in your mind, that yes, all the reason we buy stuff is because someone's convinced us it's a good idea, because it moves us from where we are to where we want to be, which is that difference. And all we have to do is give up a little bit of our labour, our equity, our money, our savings to accomplish that. Who's getting the better deal here, do you think? And with that said, I'm going to close out this episode because my brain's overheating. I need a break. One final thought, though, I suppose, is that if in the course of our listening, by moving people along in their thought process, by providing new insights or writing the next line of their paragraph, reflexive feedback, simple feedback, or even an open-ended question, changes their perception, if that's the result, that enables them to make a decision about whatever it is, because we're changing their perception and we don't know what way that's going to go for them. We don't know their internal preferences. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. Therefore, it seems ridiculous to fall foul now of the 12 roadblocks prescribing behaviour, telling them what they ought to do, because this implies we know their internal moral code and their decision-making process. And if we offer any prediction on what they ought to do, or commandment of what they need to do, it should be obvious that we're going to get it wrong. They may still even do it. They may be convinced that what you've said is a good idea, and then they'll go and do it and find out it doesn't fit them. And then they'll come back 2 weeks later and say, yeah, dickhead, that thing you told me to do. And now they can't even talk to you because they're blaming you. So, caution, I suppose, on the difference between empathy and sympathy. And there was one other loop I wanted to close. God damn it, what were we talking about? Oh, no, I can't remember. Commerce, control systems, design architecture, discrimination by design. Once you start to see it, it's everywhere. The I mean, it's everywhere. It's in the buildings, the way we navigate cities, the rail infrastructure, how we get to and from work, who can live near cities, who can afford to, even the attire, the clothes we wear, the fashion statements. It's all identity politics in some way. It defines who we are and where we fit into the system. Where we fit into that system seems to decide our level of power, what we have control over, what choices we can exercise on. And in some bizarre, ironic, kind of self-flagellating way, by playing those power roles, we sustain this system, this superstructure. We become part of it. We prop it up. We, even in our own minds, if we don't ask ourselves these questions, if we refuse to change, like these people I was poking fun at, hardcore religious extremists that have a very fixed mindset. The way that a religious, extreme, fixed mindset survives is only by virtue of being a extreme, fixed mindset. It can't question itself. It's forbidden to question itself. If it does that, then it ceases to be. Yeah, so you see what I'm saying, is that once we start identifying as these things, very fixed boundary conditions around who and what we are, defines who and what we're capable of, defines where we will go, defines who and how we will speak with people. And that just becomes like a bubble that feeds back to itself, that reconfirms that identity. So we're kind of, just bringing to attention that. Anyway, brain fried. I'm going to close this one out.